So the forest in A Midsummer Night's Dream is a border between the world of fairies and the world of humans. And I want to discuss the concept of Borderlands in relationship to this text, and specifically in Act 3 today. As defined by the American scholar and feminist Gloria Anzaldu, Borderlands are physically present wherever two or more cultures edge each other, where people of different races occupy the same territory, where under, lower, middle, and upper classes touch, where the space between two individuals shrinks with intimacy. So what these borderlands do is they expose differences through proximity. When two cultures come in contact, the individuals occupying those two cultures need to look at themselves through the eyes of another person. They expose those differences in culture, language, and power structures and everything else as simply human constructions, not as natural or inevitable. In these kinds of locations, forms of identity are fluid as people start to see themselves through the eyes of others and start to recognize their own idiosyncrasies in relationship to the behavior of other people. People can understand themselves better when they see other options, when they start to see other people. And A Midsummer Night's Dream is flooded with these borderlands and these moments of intersection between two cultures. It starts with the anticipation of a marriage between Theseus and Hippolyta, an Athenian and an Amazonian, two different cultures coming together in marriage. And to prepare for this wedding, the working-class craftsmen aspire to perform in front of an upper-class audience, and they struggle with how to present themselves. That performance will be a point of contact between two classes, and the players wonder how they're going to be perceived by the nobles. They try to view themselves through the eyes of the social elite. And of course, when the lovers escape into the woods, those woods serve as a contact point between the fairy world and the human world. In Act 3, the borderlands bring about shifting identities and desires take center stage. So let's wander through these places where the values of different populations come in contact with each other, places where imagination and perception intersect. Let's read Act 3 of A Midsummer Night's Dream, play by play. So this is part of a larger series of videos analyzing every act of A Midsummer Night's Dream, and if this seems like your kind of thing, please consider subscribing. And with that said, we're just going to dig into Act 3. Act 3 begins with the players. Peter Quince picks out a green plot of land to serve as their rehearsal space. In other words, he asks the actors to pretend that a patch of lawn is a stage. So if we were watching this play, particularly on an unornamented Elizabethan stage, we would be looking at a wooden stage, and Peter Quince would be asking us to imagine that it's a green patch of land, while asking his cast to imagine that it's a wooden stage. We, of course, but still somehow miraculously, have no problem doing that. It doesn't break anybody's brain. I mean, in the previous scene, we were asked to imagine two visual planes of existence simultaneously, one inhabited by the fairies who put magic love juice on the eyes of sleeping Athenians. Our imaginations somehow have no problem with this. It's fine. We're okay with it. This is worth noting as we listen to the conversation that follows. They're discussing some concerns that they have with their play. Bottom thinks it might be inappropriate for him to pull out a sword in front of his audience. The ladies cannot abide it. And Starveling actually thinks that they may need to leave the killing out of the play altogether. They're concerned that they might be so good at acting that these scenes will scare their audience. It might get too real. Bottom proposes a solution. Write me a prologue, he says, and let the prologue seem to say we will do no harm with our swords, and that Pyramus is not killed indeed, and the more better assurance, tell them that I, Pyramus, am not Pyramus, but Bottom the Weaver. So he has an outsized confidence in his own acting ability to convince everybody that he is actually the character that he is playing, and that he will actually take his own life. And implicitly, he has another lack of confidence in his audience, that they will not be able to distinguish what is real. This conversation is about the border between reality and imagination, a border that theater is certainly inhabiting. This border is further emphasized when Bottom and the rest of his cast decide that they need to have a human perform as the moon, and another human perform as a literal wall, a literal boundary or border. Bottom says, some man or other must present wall, and let him have some plaster or some loam or some rough cast about him to signify wall. They will have someone signify a wall, an obstacle that stands between two lovers. Again, these incompetent thespians, they're teaching us how to read the play that we are watching. The wall exists in our imagination, but is played by a man. It is signified with a rough cast plaster, but we do not mistake it for an actual wall. We know that it's a man inhabiting the costume of a wall. We know that the wall is literally a man-made construction. Similarly, that obstacle that keeps Hermia from Lysander is a law, the will of her father, supported by the power structures in place within Athens. These are walls that do not actually exist in perceptual reality. They only exist within the mind, a shared cultural construction of obligation. They are man-made. That wall, that obstacle, it does not exist. But Bottom and the others do not trust that this kind of shared imaginative perception is possible and feel the need to give it a physical form. I'll be returning to the role of imagination in theater when I discuss the performance of Pyramus and Thisbe in the Act 5 video, but for now, let's focus on the interaction between the players and the fairies. Pan shows up to watch this performance and takes an interest in Bottom. He takes an opportunity when Bottom is offstage to transform his head into that of a donkey. When he returns to the stage, he scares away his fellow cast members who think that the play is haunted. Bottom, though, refuses to give up the stage. Even if everybody wants to mock him, even if they're afraid of him, he'll sing his song anyway. And his singing wakes up Tatiana. It seems that the world of man has influenced the world of fairies instead of just the other way around. So in this play, we have three layers of being. The fairy world seems to have the greatest influence. The Athenian nobles, like Theseus, Lysander, and Hermia, rank below them, and then finally, at the bottom of this hierarchy, we have Bottom and the other craftsmen. At this moment, the highest-ranking female within this chain of being, the queen of the fairies, Tatiana, falls in love with the lowest-ranking man in this hierarchy, the literal Bottom. The love potion, or just love generally, has removed these hierarchical boundaries. In the borderlands of this forest, Bottom is treated as a prince, and he seems to have little problem adapting to this lifestyle. Bottom is comfortable everywhere. He can play all of the parts. Borders and binaries mean nothing to Bottom. He'll play Pyramus and Thisbe, man and fairy, low status and high status. Give him all of the parts. But we, like the play, will leave him for now and move on to Act 3, Scene 2, the climax of the play, the fight scene. It starts with Oberon overjoyed at the success of Puck's mission. Tatiana, falling in love with a disfigured Bottom, exceeds his expectations. However, he also finds out that Puck mistakenly put the love juice on Lysander's eyes, and he sets out to fix this. And Puck just seems to be wildly entertained by all this. And he says, "Shall we their fond pageant see? Lord, what fools these immortals be." And for me, that just confirms that for Puck, the human world is just a sort of fun reality TV show. For him, this point of contact between his world and the human world is entertainment. Oberon pursues control, but Puck pursues pleasure. The result of this mess is that both male leads, Lysander and Demetrius, now pursue Helena instead of Hermia. Helena's self-confidence has been beaten down, however, and so she thinks that they're both just making fun of her. She has accepted and perhaps even fetishized her own subordination in her pursuit of Demetrius, so now that she has an excess of male attention, including that of Demetrius, she becomes frustrated and angry. When Hermia arrives, Helena believes that she's conspiring against her as well, and it gets really interesting. Helena has a speech starting at line 187 that I want to investigate a little further. In that speech, she implores Hermia to remember their youth and their former friendship. She's trying to understand how they went from friends to competitors, how they went from loving each other to competing over men. She asks Hermia, "Is all the counsel that we two have shared, the sisters' vows, the hours that we have spent when we have chid the hasty-footed time for parting us? Oh, is all forgot? All school days friendship, childhood innocence?" This speech illustrates a movement from childhood into adulthood. Their childhood here is fashioned as a sort of paradise. As Helena says, they grew together like to a double cherry, seeming parted, but yet a union in partition. Two lovely berries molded on one stem. So just as the movement from childhood to adulthood is a movement from innocence to experience, these friends have moved from an idyllic friendship to competition and conflict over boys. They have been forced into this world of womanhood with its expectation of marriage, and crossing that threshold has forced them to abandon their old friendships. And Helena is very direct in this analysis. She asks Hermia, "Will you rent our ancient love asunder to join with men in scorning your poor friend?" Here she's asking if Hermia is actually willing to give up on that childhood friendship to side with a bunch of men. And yeah, it seems like she is. She's also already given up her position as Aegeus' daughter, so surely she's willing to give up her identity as friend to Helena in order to be with Lysander. That pure childhood friendship, it's over. That said, Shakespeare does give us plenty of reason to question this description of friendship between Helena and Hermia. It may not have actually been a paradise. As soon as Hermia gets angry enough to threaten Helena, Helena says, "You perhaps may think because she is something lower than myself that I can match her." So that implies that they've had these kinds of fights before. Helena knows that Hermia can throw down. She knows that even though Hermia be but little, she be fierce. Maybe their youth wasn't exclusively holding hands and sharing their thoughts. And it's not just Helena and Hermia who are leaning into their adult identities in the scene. The men in this scene are also on a border between childhood and adulthood, as they both stand between Helena and Hermia trying to prevent a fight and protect Helena. They increasingly lean into traditionally male behaviors of protection and bravery and boasts of physical toughness. They care more about performing manhood than they do about being with the women, which becomes evident when Puck steps in. Puck uses this performance of male bravado to manipulate them, separating them and ultimately putting them both to sleep. It's also notable that he plays with their senses in order to do this. Again, we have Shakespeare exploring this tension between our senses and our imagination. Puck takes on the voice and performs as each of the boys, and in doing so, he tricks them away from each other. Puck's performance is convincing in the way that Bottom believes his performance will be convincing. It has real-world consequences. Hermia ends this scene by praying that the heavens shield Lysander, so she still loves him and wants what's best for him. But I think the way Helena leaves this scene is the most interesting. She's just done with all the drama by the end of this scene. She says, "And now, so you will let me quiet go to Athens, will I bear my folly back and follow you no further. Let me go. You see how simple and how fond I am." She's no longer willing to chase Demetrius, no longer pursuing friendship with Hermia. She just wants to go back to Athens and leave all these toxic relationships behind. She says that the only thing that kept her there was a foolish heart, and she intends to leave it behind as well. So it is possible to read Helena's character arc as a movement toward self-definition. She's no longer letting these people guide her behavior. She's independent by the end of this scene. So let's just zoom out and take a quick look at her full character arc up until this point. At the start of the play, we learned that she and Demetrius were romantically involved. She was made to feel attractive and validated by him. And when he left her and decided to pursue Hermia, Helena continued to pursue that validation and continued to let Demetrius define her role, to use her words, as his spaniel. But even then, there was an insistence on her own worth. She considered her desire for him more important than his desire to leave her. And here, at the end of Act 3, she's prepared to leave all of that behind. She leaves this scene a new person, less willing to let herself be defined by others. She fully inhabits and owns that dignity that she's actually had all along, but this time, that sense of her own self-worth is self-determined, absent of unnecessary external validation. So to summarize these borderland themes in this act, Helena looks back on her past friendship through the eyes of her adult self, and she recognizes her own dignity. Bottom is validated through the eyes of a fairy queen, and the players try to imagine the influence that they can have on the upper class by imagining their play through the eyes of the nobility. We see how transformative Borderlands can be in this act. It's really empowering, but Helena, along with everybody else, is put to sleep by Puck in the end of this act. They'll wake up in Act 4, which we'll cover next time, so please subscribe if you want to be notified when I release that video and for future seasons, and thank you for watching this one.